Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're going to be presenting some research that CMB has done in their most recent Consumer Pulse on exploring the new era of brand trust. Um, as we get started here, please feel free to chime in the chat and introduce yourself, where you're from, and any specific things that you're interested in hearing about today would be great to see as we go through. There's also a Q&A area within Zoom, so feel free to use that. Pop in questions. We'll be trying to monitor that as we go, but likely most of those will pop to the end. But appreciate you, keeping the conversation going. We've got a lot to cover today, but we also have a lot of room for conversation, wanting to make sure that we all have a chance to digest this as we walk through it. One of the reasons I'm really excited about this study and presenting these findings today is it somewhat builds on some research that we did last May on adoption of AI. And in that research, what we realized was that trust is a huge issue, not only with AI overall, but with the specific brands that are deploying AI. And in fact, it seemed that some brands had more permission to play with AI than others. And so it led us to start thinking about brand trust more generally and what that looks like today and where it's going in the future. So I'm Monika Rogers. I'm the VP of Growth Strategy here at CMB. My role is really to help the company kind of look at and launch new solutions, to understand the market strategy, what's going on in the world, and to bring thought leadership events like this to clients thus and prospects like yourselves. So welcome. I am joined by a lovely panel of other folks that will be presenting today, and I'll let each of them introduce themselves. Jay, you want to kick us off?
Sure, Jay Weiner. I'm the chief methodologist at CMB, heading up the advanced analytics team. My team's kind of responsible for all things statistical.
Excellent. Lori Vellucci, I am the practice leader for financial services, and I was fortunate enough to be part of the project team that worked on this Consumer Pulse. It's been a great deal of fun, and we're really excited to present these results today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa McFarland. I lead our activation space, so guiding how we turn insights into strategy, and that can be to inform, to influence, to integrate action. So basically, a big part of what I do is simplify the complexity of knowledge and how people work together. Excited to be here with you all.
Thanks, Lisa. Um, so just to kick us off in thinking about this topic overall, I thought I would just bring in a couple of recent things from the news, even just in the last few weeks. The first one is on Sonos and the fact that even since last May, when they had their kind of debacle with their app launch, they've really struggled to kind of regain confidence among consumers. And they've transitioned to an interim CEO, and he's really working on this a strategy and approach of transparency, of really allowing customers a peek under the tent at what they think happened, and what they're doing moving forward. Is that the right approach to gain trust? Great question. The next one is Meta. And I think we've all seen a lot of news around Meta's changes to, decide to kind of move away from their moderation method to a more similar to the approach that X is using, and that's created a bit of conversation from their advertisers about what does this mean for where and how my advertising is going to be placed, and trust around content. And how that's going to be looking moving forward. Is that the right strategy for Meta to take? I think that's something yet to be seen. So lots of great kind of fodder for the kinds of decisions that organizations are making on a daily basis that can move the needle on trust, right? And when we look at it, there's really three kind of broad dimensions of trust that we can be looking at. From a consumer perspective, right? Trust can help increase consideration, build confidence in a purchase decision, or even increase the perceived value of buying from or using that brand. For the brands themselves, trust is a way to build loyalty, to build retention, build towards brand advocacy, right? And trust can even be a point of competitive advantage. And then when you look more broadly organizationally, right, trust can help with crisis resilience. It can help increase and improve employee engagement, which is really important, especially a lot of brands rely on that employee engagement, and all of us rely on our teams to deliver on our value proposition, and can help deliver sustainable growth. So brand trust is really a long-term critical part of any organization. And in fact, in this research study, we actually saw a really strong correlation between brand trust and brand consideration and satisfaction. So, in essence, those brands that had a high trust score were more likely to be considered among non-buyers, were more likely to have satisfaction among current buyers and users, whereas brands that had lower trust scores had lower consideration scores and lower satisfaction. So that's a really important linkage that suggests that brand trust has a really important impact on our organizations. So before I move forward, I thought I'd just pop in a quick poll question, just wanting to understand a little bit more about how you're currently measuring brand trust. So I'll give you a minute here to kind of pick which of these options categories might best fit where you are as an organization, and then we'll share this out with the group just to get a sense of where you are today. Is this something that you're managing and measuring as kind of a standalone trust metric? Is this just a single question that you have within your current brand tracker? Is it something you look at on an ad hoc basis or through social media, or not really on your radar as something that you're measuring on a regular basis? So I'll give you just a few more seconds here, and Michelle, feel free to pop that in whenever you think we've got a good quorum. Ah, there we go. All right. So a lot of folks, single question within brand health tracking, that's probably aligned with what Jay's theory was as we were running through some of the results. Some of you not measuring, some of you, a few of you doing this as a standalone metric. So just gives you all a sense of where we all stand today.
And I think it holds true. I think that whole single question within the current brand health tracker, right? That's what we see. And we've seen in the past with many of our clients and their tracking programs. So really that need to get beyond that just single measure of is a brand I trust, I think was certainly one of the genesis of this particular initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me talk a little bit more about CMB and kind of how we approach this research project to give you guys a little bit more context as you start to see the findings in more detail. We are a leading insights and strategy consultancy firm, kind of known as a great place to work, known as one of the most innovative companies in the insights space, a real strong partner with Insights Association. And our passion is really about helping our clients deliver business impact. We do that through kind of partnership and collaboration with our clients. We have a very strong emphasis, as Lisa's here today, on storytelling and aligning within the organizations to inspire action. And a lot of our methodologies are driven from kind of this human psychology lens, a deep industry expertise. We think that that's a really critical part of any kind of insights work. And then a real area and of a focus for us in the past year has been this AI plus human powered intelligence, really bringing that into the methodology. And I'll be sharing more with you on that in a second here. So there was two parts to the research study. The first part was a quantitative survey. It was around among 1,400 adults. We did balance that on age, income, gender, region. We also, as we were looking for specific trust information on financial services, tech and telecom, media and entertainment. There were some other metrics that we used in here to make sure that we got a good representation of responses based on, say, wealth profile or media usage, things like that. And then the other part of this is that we didn't just ask your kind of typical closed-ended questions. We added a smart probe kind of within the study, within our open end. So I have an example of this on the right-hand side of the screen, where we might ask a traditional open end, right? So why did you rate it that way? And then we kind of trained up an AI to look at those responses, determine where we wanted to probe based on what we were interested in learning, and then it articulated a smart probe to get more rich responses from folks. And we use that not only as part of our coding, but also to develop themes and to kind of measure emotions in those responses. So both the type of emotion as well as the active versus passive kind of emotions. So the level of emotion that was kind of coming out. In addition, we did qualitative interviews. We did 51 kind of self-led interviews. So in this case, they were asked a question. You can see the questions there on the right, and then recorded a video response. So there's an example up at the top right. We asked them what trust stands for. And in my opinion, trusting a brand means that I trust what they stand for. I trust their actions. I trust their communication and their marketing. And when they tell me whatever their product or service is, that it's great, I trust that it is. And so that's just one example of the kinds of video responses that we received. In this case, we used AI to analyze those responses, but we also have the capability to have like avatar-led video IDIs where we can do AI probing. In this particular case, we wanted more consistent responses, so we didn't use the AI in the probing, but those are all kind of tools and methodologies that we can deploy in our research. And one of the reasons that I bring this up is because we've really seen a significant improvement, not just in efficiency, but in quality of responses in using AI. So our AI probing that we used in the quantitative piece actually increased the response rate by 75%. And it wasn't people repeating themselves and saying the same thing. We actually identified 46% more themes, which means we were able to get more insights out of those open ends. And in fact, we had fewer uncoded responses. So we were able to better represent the audience with that coding and better represent responses. So really, in effect, we're getting better quality responses with the kind of the AI plus HI approach. Now, with all this said, I'm going to turn it over to Jay to talk a little bit more specifically about how we measured brand trust.
So as we saw in the quick poll that we just did, a lot of companies do in fact measure trust, and it is typically a single attribute in a tracking study or a brand health study. Is a brand I trust, or is a company I trust, or whatever it might be. And we see from research that that's a very common driver, a significant driver of intent to repurchase, intent to do business with, overall satisfaction, those kinds of key metrics that we're interested in moving. And the problem with that is essentially it doesn't help me fix it. Like if I want to understand how do I fix trust, what do I do about it? And so our goal here in this research was to see if we could uncover dimensions of trust that would become actionable for our clients to actually fix their trust issues if they have them, or continue to enhance the trust that they've earned in the marketplace. So we started out with a set of brand dimensions around the concept of trust, different components of things that we thought made up trust. And we took that battery of attributes and we ran a factor analysis, and we uncovered some key dimensions that represented unique trust things that our clients might be able to act on. And we used those factors then to create an overall trust score by weighting the 6 key factors into a common trust score that we can then use to compare how well we're doing with other brands in the industry, across industries, whatever it might be that we're measuring. Just kind of a quick plug on the bottom, we have a kind of a footnote. Gradient boost machine learning is a common driver tool that we use at CMB. We like it a lot for a variety of reasons. One, it does a better than average job of dealing with multicollinearity. It allows for missing data. Sometimes we intentionally let respondents say don't know or provide no answer to the question. And a lot of driver tools do list-wise deletions and remove candidates or respondents from the modeling. And so there's a couple reasons why we like that tool better than other tools that are in the toolbox. So the research factor analysis led us to find 6 key factors of brand trust, and these are dependability, transparency, integrity, customer first, responsive, and relevance. The weights that you see in this particular bar chart are an example of how this works. We actually derive weights for each of these factors by category or by subcategory. And so some categories, and you'll see later when Lori's sharing some of the key insights, that in different sectors in financial services, traditional banks have different drivers. And it all makes sense in terms of how impactful these things are. You'll see in a lot of the examples going forward that relevance and doesn't seem to have a lot of play in this. And it's not one of the key drivers in most of the research that we're seeing in the categories that we've done. But we think in the future, some of these things, and we show you the components that are measuring each of these factors, some of the things are kind of future looking from our Consumer Pulse study on AI adoption. We think this responsible use of AI technology to enhance consumer experience is something that's probably going to become much more impactful in the future, not so much necessarily today, but that's one of the dimensions of relevance. So you can see each of these broad factors has a number of items that represent that particular construct. And so these are the things that now we know how to, if I know that dependability is the biggest driver of trust, I know what factors I can act on to move my dependability score. I'll turn it over to Lori to share some of the results.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. So we started with the 3 categories: financial services, tech and telecom, media, and entertainment, and quickly realized that there was a fair amount of sort of overlap in those categories, and that the common thread of overlap seemed to be technology. And what ended up happening is we realized that 3 broad categories wasn't going to serve us as well as we would like, and we ended up breaking those 3 categories into 9 subcategories, 3 within each. And that seemed to make a whole lot more sense as we began to look at the pillars or the components of trust by subcategory. And that's where it started to get quite interesting for us. When you look at the 9 subcategories, which you see on this slide, what you'll immediately see is that the dependability, transparency, integrity, etc., have different weights in terms of importance in driving trust. So for example, in fintech, dependability is significantly more important in driving trust, right? It can often be a very transactional relationship. Whereas when you get into the traditional card and banking or traditional investment firms, some of the other metrics gain more importance in driving trust, like integrity, right? Transparency, those start to mean more. And we see that across, right? So when you're looking at TV and streaming versus news versus ticketed events, you can see the difference in terms of the importance. And so this is the first time you're able to take that, is a brand I trust, is a firm I trust, and really understand what are those components of trust. And what are the ones that are most important in driving trust, right? So that's the first part of the equation. And then, of course, on the far right, you can see social media, technology in general, and telecom, and how there are some differences there. All of these are important as a brand begins to dive into trust, and more importantly, lay out a plan for positively impacting trust so that they can move those dependent variables such as satisfaction or consideration, whatever the one is that they want to move. And that's really where we begin the journey, is by saying, okay, what does the category look like, or the subcategory? And then what do the brands within look like? At the top, you see a trust score. So we went out and tested 70 brands across these 9 subcategories, and each and every brand ends up with its own trust score and its own sort of compilation of pillars in terms of which one is going to do the best job or the most good in moving trust. So that was kind of the first part of it. Lisa, I think you had some thoughts here on this slide as well.
Yes, I love the depth of these dimensions. And to me, this really drives home that importance that we talked earlier about with thinking about things from multiple lenses. So the consumer, the brand, and the organization. So if we think about consumer experience, right, as Monika had said, as consumers, we want to feel confident that the product or service is going to do what we need, but also feel valued and feel like we're getting value. It kind of reduces our risk. So if we think back to that tech example of Meta, broadening the permissions of content has pros and cons for marketers and advertisers, and also for people consuming the platform. So even the practice of sitting down and hypothesizing how these dimensions may change from those different lenses allows organizations to have great scenario discussion. And we really find that organizations find tremendous value in proactively looking for different examples of what other companies in the industry and outside of the industry are doing to keep us aware, to push us maybe a little bit further, and also just inspire us of what the possibilities are. So I love these dimensions, and I think there's multiple ways to be able to look at them.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
absolutely.
speaking of Meta, I think, looking at social media there, you see that relevance score that Jay mentioned with AI at 12%, and you see that bumping up. And I would say that one of the potential reasons for that is because AI and the algorithmic nature of what people are seeing on Facebook and other social media apps has been in the news, right? And it has been a driver of conversations and maybe people moving away from X to Blue Sky, right? And we've seen some of that trust associated with that. And so it makes sense that that's a higher value of importance for that category versus other categories. Now, that factored with some other things about this reflects me and reflects my values, which is probably why you see that also bumping up for ticketed events, where that makes a lot of sense, right? So anyway, that relevance area, while it's right now kind of relatively low, you do see it starting to pop. And I think there's a good question about how that AI component is going to change over time.
And I love how we've dimensionalized relevance when Jay did his analytics, because, traditionally relevance is that what I consider to be that throwaway variable of like, is a brand for me, right? Like, that one is the one that it's always like, that's not actionable, right? Like we can't do anything with is a brand for me, but being able to create a factor called relevance with its component parts really starts to dimensionalize it in a way that is actionable. And as it becomes more important for brands or for particular subcategories, we have a roadmap forward.
Yeah, and I think that comes out in the open ends. I know you'll be getting to those in a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is a slide. This is not all 70 brands. But you can see we laid in a number of the brands that were in our study. You may find your brand here, you may not. Some had higher trust, some were somewhere in the middle, and some had lower trust. And, when we laid out all of the brands from top to bottom, most trusted to least trusted, and took a step back and looked at them, it made intuitive sense to us. As consumers, we could look at them and say, gosh, yeah, I really do trust PBS. And boy, yeah, that brand does give me pause. So it made intuitive sense as to how the brands sort of laid out among the 70 that we tested. And in fact, what we were able to confirm with the 3 categories that we've explored, or 9 really, is that this trust score and the dimensions within trust is applicable across subcategories, across brands, and it makes a lot of sense. And, for me, I look at the range of the trust scores at the bottom, the lowest to the highest. And I wonder, Jay, from your perspective, with respect to sort of sensitivity and whatnot, how did you feel about the range that we got?
Yeah, we did a pretty good job of picking a relevant set of brands to put into this piece of research, trying to find some brands that we thought a priori had issues with trust, other brands that we thought a priori were very trusted brands, trying to capture that. I'm sure there's some brands that have lower trust scores than some of the brands that we've measured. And if we sit down and read the media posts or whatever, as the example for Sonos lost a ton of trust So, so there may be occasions, but we have a pretty broad spectrum of values here from the mid 30s to mid 80 or 70s for that particular trust metric. So feel pretty confident that we've done a pretty good job of representing the relevant set of values that that index might take or that measure might take.
Yeah, and the comment that I made about our study last May about the kind of the distrust on AI and people feeling a lot of fear and anxiety, you see kind of OpenAI kind of falling in that low trust category, potentially reflecting some of our just general feelings, right, about AI and making it more difficult maybe for them to develop trust versus say Nvidia on the right, which obviously landed as a very trusted brand, and people feel maybe more confidence or tangible feelings about that product. But obviously, they had some significant news in the past few days, and it was really interesting to watch not only the stock value price right drop so much, but then to have them be able to come on, respond to that, and have their stock price rebound may be indicative of this trust that people have to believe in their response. That's still, I think, all TBD, but interesting to watch that all just unfolding over the last couple of days.
That's right.
Yeah. And seeing some of these industries fall into different parts, like lower trust and higher trust, it just talks to me about going a step deeper. So we go from kind of our overall brand question, right, to the dimensions. We can go even deeper into that. So for example, look at financial services. It kind of spreads across there. And if we think about that industry, we're definitely finding younger investors are investing differently than older generations, right? And additionally, financial services brands don't necessarily have the same reputation with millennials than they do with other audiences. So that means we need to take another click down and think about how do we build different relationships with different targets and switch and change our strategies to adjust for that. And so our data in this research, we do have a mix of different targets like wealth personas and media usage and other ones to help dig even further into those nuances.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic point, Lisa. I think that as we look, particularly with financial services, your point about younger folks, consumers, investors coming to fin services in different ways, right? The Pay in 4 and the Klarnas of the world and whatnot are giving credit cards a run for their money, right? High yield savings accounts are giving traditional banks a run for their money. Consumers that are younger are often starting with the app they used for peer-to-peer payments, and now they're investing in crypto. So it does it does indicate a need to really hone in on those subgroups of age and assets perhaps, and certainly within the other categories, the dimensions that make sense there. So you set up the next slide quite nicely for me, so thank you. In addition to the hard data in the quant and the analytics that Jay did, Monika talked about the depth of open-ended responses. And that was really powerful for us as well, because it's not enough to measure your score, see which dimensions carry the most weight in driving trust, and even down to the attribute level where you can say, oh yeah, it's really about this. The how do I do it is really important, and the open ends provide the insights into the how do I do it question. So if you need to move dependability, right, what are the open-ended responses that are aligning with dependability? In this particular example, constantly be responding to new changes in the marketplace and in tech, right? It can give you clues as to what you should be doing, either with your messaging or with your products and services, or some combination thereof. Transparency, keep their information secure, right? Then we have a message about security there and much more. Integrity, right? This one talks about employees. So as a brand, being able to not only figure out your path forward, but also have some depth to it is really where you can start to affect change. So if we move to the next slide, where I wanted to give an example of a specific brand and how we might move forward. So if Robinhood were to come to us and say, hey, what have you learned about trust for our brand? We would be able to do a few things for that brand. First, we would be able to say, well, your brand trust score is 51, and the fintech category average within our study is 60. So there's an indication that there may be some opportunity for you to improve trust of your brand. Now, I'll pause there and say that the average category score is dependent upon the brands that are put into that category when we calculate trust. This leads to the idea of dynamic benchmarking. Sometimes we'll have clients come to us and say, well, do you have any benchmark data? And we say, well, let's talk about benchmarking. We feel at CMB that what we call dynamic benchmarking is the best benchmarking. And what dynamic benchmarking means is that it's your target audience, it's your target competitive set, and it's current, right? It isn't an off-the-shelf, here's the benchmark, which has limited meaning in most instances to our brands, right? You have a specific competitive set, you have a specific target audience, and that's how you should be benchmarking. So while we have identified the brands that fall within fintech for our purposes here, it may be a little different. When you come to us and say, yeah, but this is my competitive set, and then we can relook at it or add brands, right? We have the ability to go off and add a brand if we want. So we can do a lot of things. There's a lot of flexibility against this model we've built. But we would tell you your score, and then we would say there may be some opportunities to improve your brand trust. And then on the right-hand side, I would go back to Jay, Dr. Jay and his team, and say, can you build me a really cool simulator? And he'd come back with a really cool simulator. What this allows us to do is what he would say, spin, right? We'll spin the dimensions within each of these pillars to find out where the best bang for the buck is. So we start on the left-hand side and we say, well, okay, in this instance, dependability is going to give us at 35.8%. That's the chunk of importance to trust, right? The biggest among the 6 pillars. We want to focus on dependability, and maybe eventually we'll get to focusing on transparency too, also very important in driving trust. So we're able to see within dependability, if we move has products and or services that meet expectations or demonstrate strong knowledge and skills within the industry, if we can move those by a point, what does it do for my trust score? And you see that at the bottom. And we're able to basically create scenarios so that you can inform a creative brief, for example, or you can prioritize resources against product improvement or service improvement, whatever that might be, that will actually lead you to improving your trust score so you can sort of hone in. And that's the magic here of being able to not only measure your brand trust, but also see what to do about it. And then the next thing we would do is look at the open ends that align for your brand with the kinds of dimensions we feel we want to move in order to positively impact trust, right? So there are a number of things here. I love this first one, right? They're talking about GameStop. And GameStop happened a while ago. And what this does is it speaks to the memory of people, right? They're still playing back GameStop a while after that happened, right? It's still important to them. And then meme stocks are coming out, right? That's coming up as well. And then under empowering customers, someone's saying it's relatable. I have the same values, right? To me, there's clues there and how I might be wanting to set up my messaging if I'm doing advertising, etc. So anyway, this is the depth that we would provide back to a brand. And I think that this is really powerful. And in a couple of slides, Lisa will talk more about like, how do you wrap it all together and develop a plan to move forward? But to summarize, the way that we would approach a brand or a client coming to us is the first thing we would do is say, okay, you need to measure your brand trust score. And then you need to benchmark it against the category that you're in. The next slide on 18 shows sort of that process. And then from there, we're going to identify the gaps, right? Where are the gaps in the pillars of brand trust? The ones where maybe you're scoring a little lower than competitors, but we know it's an important area, for example, in driving trust for your subcategory and your brand. And then we'll help you target that messaging. right? What are we learning from the depth of open ends? What would we suggest you do as you're thinking about your creative brief, as you're thinking about improving your customer service, for example? And then measuring improvement over time. When someone asks, Jay, how frequently should we do this? And say, well, if you're not taking any action, you shouldn't do it again at all. I like to read that the opposite way, right? Formulate that action, take that action, and then measure. So maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's a year, whatever that cadence is that's correct for your brand. But I think Jay's point would be well taken, which is you gotta do something about it if you want to measure it over time.
Okay, so we have that great framework, but let's talk tangible now. So when we think about bridging insights with action or trying to formulate our strategy, it's so important to look at what's going well and what isn't, but in the full context. So think again, multi-lens, consumer, market, and the organization. So that is what is going to empower the mindset to evaluate and feel confident in what we want to do next. So here are 3 ways that we are helping clients take a step in this direction based on what we've done with this brand trust research. All of these cases could be true if we already have your brand in our story, or we can simply go out and get that information as well. So the first one is get an industry check. So we can share this information with you by industry, and together we can talk about where the competition is, where your brand fits, and identify that first next step for you specifically. The second one is thinking about doing more of a strategic brand assessment. So yes, let's look at your brand against these dimensions and take it a step further and layer in your current brand strategy. Scorecard the brand against these drivers, see what happens to that trust score if we improve certain dimensions. And we could even evaluate some of the current initiatives, looking at the open ends and other information you have to understand where we should stop, start, and pivot. So that's a great one. The third one is that idea of tracking the brand over time. So this could be point in time to track specific activities that are happening with research, with web scraping, so that we can define and quantify how people are feeling, what's triggering their emotions and reactions to those activities. It can also be paired with ongoing efforts, like Lori was saying, every 6 months, every year, however we want to do that, to track the brand along with competition on these dimensions, dive into those targets, start to uncover patterns and scenario plan for the future. So there are many ways to uncover and strengthen brand trust. These are a few examples of how we're working with clients to activate on that information. And of course, we're happy to talk to you about where you guys are at and what you need.
Yeah. So before I get to Q&A, just a reminder to pop those into the Q&A box. I see a couple already in there, but I wanted to just revisit the AI plus HI capabilities again for all of you here. In addition to being able to help you with brand trust, I think there are a lot of ways that we are building AI plus HI into our research that might inform other types of research that you're doing. Whether you're interested in AI moderated IDIs, kind of conversational surveys where you can have that chatbot asking a mix of open-ended and closed-ended questions dynamically, or AI prompts, open ends within a traditional survey. So all methodologies that we are kind of using on a regular basis. And then from an analytical perspective, analyzing that open-ended data, whether it's from a survey or even social media scraping, is an area we can help you with, as well as theme and emotion analysis. So we went through some theme analysis today. We did not show you our emotional analysis, but that is another area that we can dive deeper in. Like, what are the passive emotions? What are the active emotions that, again, might help you figure out what things are really going to move the needle in terms of that trust, emotion, and feeling, right, that people have. And then the final area is in fraud detection. And I would be remiss to not bring this up to all of you. Obviously, with AI and bots, there has been a continued increase in activity, fraudulent activity, and continued efforts needing to be made across our industry to make sure that we have valid responses. CMB launched a new AI plus HI fraud detection program just a few months ago. We have another webinar on that if you're interested in it, but that is something that we are strongly committed to. And at the end of the day, what we see is if we can get higher quality responses, we can get more accurate learning, then all of you benefit with more and better outcomes. So with that, I am going to open it up to questions. You all will get the recording coming out of this in your inbox. We also have a report coming out on this, so you'll have more data and information in the next couple of weeks. So we've just kind of, I know, hit the surface on this, but you can just grab that QR code there and reach out to Lori via email if you're interested in getting your specific brand data or finding out if we have your data. If you didn't see your brand listed, happy to provide that for you and follow up with you on that. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. I think the first one is, can you expand on the AI Smart Probe capability that you mentioned at the beginning? How does this work in a survey? So Smart Probe is a really kind of great capability that can be done in a number of ways. Oftentimes in this particular survey, rather than kind of taking a respondent from a traditional survey format into like a chatbot, kind of conversation, rather than kind of jarring them into a different format, we actually just continue to use the same survey format that they're used to. So they see an open-ended question, and then they see another open-ended question, and they have no idea that there was AI in the background kind of checking on their specific response, but they may notice that the probe, right, is very specific to their response. So they're going to kind of feel the AI, but they're not going to see it in that kind of formatted way. Whereas if we use a more conversational survey, it'll actually have that tone all the way through for every closed and open-ended question. So you'll have that sense of like, hi, how are you doing today? Can you tell me about blank, right? And then they'll have some things that are closed-ended, things they can drop down or things that they can answer, and they'll kind of have that feel for the entire survey. But we kind of try to create some consistency in how we build that. And oftentimes we do, not only do we train the AI, but we test it, right? So we put in responses, we see if we're getting the kind of probing we want, because part of this is really making sure that the AI is probing on the things that we want it to probe on, right? And not probing on the things that we don't, and having the right level of additional probing, right? You don't want to over probe a response. You don't want to under probe. So kind of figuring out what that right level of probing is, depending on, if you're leaning the study more towards qual, or kind of trying to get that balance in the middle. Next question, I will give this one to Jay, I think. This simulator capability seems very cool. How can I interpret the movement for my brand on a particular dimension or attribute?
Jay, you're on mute.
Oh, good point. The simulator is kind of one of those things that we look at as a forward looking. So like if we decided we wanted to change our trust dimension, if I could move this, a lot of times clients will use these things for goal setting. So currently my mean is 5.3 on this. I would need to get that to a 6.3. What effect would that have on my trust score? So you can play with those simulators to figure out what kind of impact. Now, if you collect another wave's worth of data, you should be able to take the current values of those dimensions of trust, plug them into the simulator, and it should accurately reflect the trust score that was just calculated for that particular wave, suggesting the simulator has some validity as a forward-looking tool. And we often see that as if we collect data that's 6 months from now, a year from now, or whatever it is, plug those current values in, the trust score will, be reflective of that current thing, and it should match what the simulator said we would be likely to achieve if we did that 6 months ago. But it helps the clients sort of play the game of, I can only focus on one or two things. So I think if I need to improve something, I can't fix everything at once. So what's the biggest bang for my buck, and how far can I actually move it?
Yeah, and one of the things I really like about this mind frame is it gets us away from just looking at like, oh, I'm performing low on this, I should perform better, or I'm performing high on this, I should perform lower. Instead, it changes our way of thinking to say, what's really important to change, right? Rather than just where are you versus competition. And you may have a place where trust can be a differentiator for your brand, but it also may be something where maybe it's just improving it to create more trust relative to competition and not be a differentiator for you. So I think there's really cool ways that the simulator kind of helps focus you on things that are important rather than just kind of the way that we might have looked at it in the past. All right, next question. I work largely in the healthcare space. How do you see these findings of dimensions of trust applying to that category?
Yeah,
Lori,
I mean,
you want to take that
I
one?
would look to Jay to add more, but we're really confident that these dimensions are gonna work across categories. So you may see a different weight for the 6 pillars in terms of the biggest driver of trust and so on, but the 6 will remain. I wonder, Jay, if you would have more to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the theory we have going forward is we think the factors that we've created should represent dimensions of trust across any industry that we might measure. It's certainly possible to replicate the research, start with a full battery of attributes, recreate the factors and see if in fact they do match up. It's certainly a testable hypothesis. But as Lori said, we certainly expect that the relevant importance or relative importance of each of those factors to vary by industry. And so certainly in healthcare, relevance might be a bigger driver than dependability or whatever it might be that we see in other industries.
Great. I've got 2 people asking about whether we're planning to extend the study to other industries, and I think that's certainly something that we all have been discussing here internally, given the amazing initial reactions that we've gotten to this research. There's certainly opportunities, and we have many other practice areas within CMB that we focus on. So we do have a specific healthcare practice area. We also do work in retail and in many other categories. So we'll definitely be looking at what the extendability is of this, but definitely can work with you to, if you're interested, to get that process started. So appreciate all those questions. Um, I think I might have answered most of these questions. Unless there's anything else, I want to thank you all for joining us today. This has been a fantastic conversation. Really enjoy the time. Thank you, Lori, Lisa, and Jay, for your fantastic perspectives and contributions today. And we look forward to connecting with all of you. Reach out to any of us if you have questions. We're happy to help in any way possible. And thank you again for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Have a great day.
Take care.